afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Flawless 195 World Tour. I'm Captain Wilson, and this is flight 130 of 218. It's Baku, Azerbaijan to Tehran, Iran. Departure time is about 3:15 in the afternoon, local time. For a total flight time, it's under an hour again. It's 45 minutes again. Seems like the last sort of half dozen flights have all been around this half an hour / 3/4 of an hour sort of time length. But that's fine by me. Means we get up there, cruise for a quarter of an hour, and then back down we come. We're heading south to Mehrabad International Airport, Tehran, and it is 2 degrees upon our arrival. Now, there is a chance of snow. I've just been looking at the weather app, and yeah, there's a bit of snow in the air around Tehran at the moment. So let's see how that plays out. I think it's going to be thick cloud. There is also a mountain range that we have to get over just before we get into the... so basically Tehran is just on the other side of the mountain range. So we have to avoid those mountains as we come on down, presumably through thick cloud. And yeah, not hit anything. And I will deviate as necessary, as I feel necessary. Hopefully we have some decent visibility and we can see those mountains before we're on top of them. And yeah, so we swoop down over the mountain range and into Mehrabad International Airport. Like I say, 3/4 of an hour flight, so we'll get up to cruising altitude. Like I say, cruise for 10-15 minutes and back down we come. But yeah, 2 degrees, chance of snow. First snowfall on the Flawless 195 World Tour, possible. I don't know if that's going to be accurate on the sim. If it is snowing, will it be snowing? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's get on with it. Let's get up there, up in the air now. I'll get the plane set up, get the safety demo on, and then I want to watch a podcast about the new Formula One season. Something about all your burning questions ahead of the 2026 F1 season, something like that. Yeah, your burning F1 2026 questions answered. So we'll get that on. Hopefully I'll have a clearer picture going into this season by the time we land at Mehrabad. But other than that, let's get the plane set up now, get up in the air, and hopefully it's you know, drama-free flight through the snow, through the cloud, over the mountains. Let's do it. Welcome to flight 130. It's Baku to Tehran. Let's do it.
Please pay attention to illuminated signs and crew instructions, including the following safety procedures. The safety card found in your seat pocket contains important information about exit routes, oxygen masks, life jackets, and the brace position that you must adopt if you hear brace, brace. There are 8 emergency exits on this aircraft. The cabin crew are now pointing out the exits nearest to you. Please be aware that your nearest usable exit may be behind you. Emergency lighting will guide you to an exit. In an emergency, leave all baggage on board. Your seatbelt is fastened, adjusted, and released as shown. It must be fastened when the seatbelt signs are on, and we recommend that you keep it fastened at all times. If the air supply fails, masks will drop from above you. Pull a mask towards you to start the oxygen. Put the mask over your nose and mouth and breathe normally. Hold the mask in place with the strap. Pull on each side to adjust. Put on your own mask before helping others. If we land on water, take a life jacket from under your seat. Remove from the pouch and put it over your head. Pass the tapes around your waist and click together. Pull the strap to adjust. Do not inflate it inside the aircraft. When outside, inflate it by pulling the toggle. If it fails to inflate or needs topping up, blow into this tube. There is a light and whistle for attracting attention. The cabin crew can assist you with life jackets for children. Your tray table must now be stowed, armrests down, window blinds open, and seatbelt fastened. Further information regarding your safety on board can be found in the in-flight magazine. We hope you have a great flight.
The race is on, and with the first launch events imminent, we answer your questions on F1 2026. How will Active Aero really work? What drivers are best suited to thrive? Can Full Works teams steal a march on customers? I'm Ed Straw, and joining me to answer those questions and more are Scott Mitchell-Malm and John Noble. Well, we've had loads of questions from our listeners via the Race Members Club on Patreon, John, so we're not going to hang around, we're going to get straight into it. The first question is from Matthew Dowling, who says, are any teams actually excited for this new era? It feels like everyone bar the FIA and F1 are dreading 2026. And Chuck Aoki says it feels like everything I've read or seen about the new regs is negative, or at least not optimistic. What does the best case scenario look like?
The best case scenario is that actually I think a lot of the rules are quite good. That I think we've got cars that aren't going to be so ride height sensitive. They should be able to follow each other closer. They've got tons of power. They should be able to be very, very quick down a straight. They'll be punching themselves out of corners an awful lot. So there is a lot of positivity with them. I think all the negativity and downside comes from the lack of energy, that these cars are energy starved, the batteries are going to struggle a lot. We don't know what impact that's going to have on the racing. So I think you've got a bit of a mixed bag. And I think this is the feeling you get from teams, that they're quite excited by a rules reset. They're excited by Active Aero, which would be really fascinating. Excited about the challenges of the new rules, but there is this big question, and it's probably an answer we aren't going to get probably until 5-6 races in. What is it going to be like? What is the impact? And more importantly, will we see it? Because it doesn't matter if the teams are unhappy, if the spectacle doesn't suffer from it. Is that an issue or not?
I'm quite looking forward to cars running on track in testing before we even get to the racing part, because a lot of the narratives either way will start to crystallise a little bit more fairly. All the doomsday, or the more doomsday end of the spectrum narratives will fade if the cars are running a bit more reliably, or there are some good elements to it. But the sort of slightly manufactured sheen that comes sometimes with some of F1's messaging around different things, that will be exposed slightly if and when there are certain problems. And it's not that it's either going to be one great success or one massive disaster, but one of the issues that you have more than ever nowadays is, and that, I'm not aiming this at F1 specifically as an entity, the FIA is guilty of it, the teams are guilty of it, it's a wider world thing too, but there is a big desire to kind of control the messaging and spin things positively and try and shut down on criticism and things like that. So that's probably why, getting back to the heart of the question, there is kind of this sense of, well, what actually is the state of play going into 2026? Who wants this? Who fears it? Who likes it? And whatnot. And the reality is, no one's in only one camp. There's things that are going to be good, there's things that are going to be bad, and that is part of the joy of the next few weeks and months, is starting to figure out kind of how much is good and how much is bad and what's the reality.
I think one important thing is the cars look good. I think from what I know we've not seen a definitive 26 car as it raced in Melbourne, but that snapshot of the Audi we got, it looks all right. The renders we've seen from FOM and FI, they look all right. I remember those terrible noses we had in the early 2000s where teams were embarrassed and teams were hiding them at launches, and that was a real bad time for Formula 1, and people dreading revealing what they designed. So I think it's good that the cars look fantastic.
It doesn't look like the 2026 cars or any of them will need to be pixelated out or like shared past a 9pm watershed or anything like that.
Bring back the 2014 Caterham or something like that. That's what we like to see. But the reality is, there's a best case scenario there and a worst case scenario there. And the best case scenario is it's absolutely brilliant racing. Everyone loves it. It's perfect. The worst case scenario is it's dreadful. Everyone hates it. And it's going to be somewhere in the middle, isn't it? That's the reality, and it's picking that apart and the detail, taking the good bits and augmenting them and tackling the weak bits. That's what it's going to be about, because no rule set can be perfect. So we have to be realistic, and that comes down to that messaging point from F1, doesn't it, Scott? That if you're trying to say everything's going to be brilliant, then inevitably the counter message goes the other way.
Yes, and also one thing that is really important, just in general, but especially in in sport and F1 and places where people can't just sort of get all the information for themselves and have to rely on what they're being told, it's actually really important to just own the bad stuff, because trying to cover it up and insisting that everything's really good, first of all, it means that people just will stop believing you because you only say everything's really good. So then when stuff is genuinely good, the message falls a bit flat, because that's kind of consistent with the narrative at all. If you say something's bad when it's bad, then when you say something's good, you're more likely to be believed. And that's kind of the role that we feel, and that's why independent media, I think, is important, even though there's different ways it can be done. It can be what would be more conventional media, it can be new media, it can be content creators, it can be stuff on social media. Like, just the main thing is just that there is something separate to the kind of ecosystem itself to be able to say if something's good or bad. The other thing is that kind of goes along with that is that you can't fear what a bad narrative, and it's like bad narrative, like it's temporary. You shouldn't fear what the impact will be. F1 is strong enough to survive any problems with the new rules or the new cars or anything like that, and actually there's an opportunity for storytelling within that, and there's an opportunity for F1 itself to be able how they worked through certain technological challenges.
And of course, this comes back to what we were saying in the podcast we released right at the start of the year. I won't go over the ground we've already talked about here, but obviously the fact that first test is behind closed doors, there's going to be a lot of nonsense that fills that gap, which is one of the reasons why that's a mistake. So have to be really careful about trying to sort the fact from the fiction. Right, let's move on to the next question. This one's for you, Scott. It's a mashup of questions from Kevin Henderson, Seamus and Daniel Hayes. Can you explain how active aero will work in practice? Does the driver have to do anything, and is it the same for everyone?
Yeah, the driver does. It's not just when they get into the the activation zone that the wings just automatically open, close, whatever the phraseology you want to use around it. Activate and deactivate feels to be the most accurate at the moment. I'm really curious actually to see physically what it looks like when they open and what designs teams go for. There is a little bit of flexibility of what they can do with the front wing, for example, and like how many elements actually move. And there was also like a little bit of confusion because like we've had different points of like renders and videos where they've looked different, like what the FIA's put out versus what others have put out looks different. So I'm just curious to see it. But the heart of the question, the kind of how it will work, I think it stems from, there's been some concerns I've noted, a bit of a common theme in questions from the members club, but also in sort of wider conversations about F1 2026, where people are wondering if it's a safety issue or if there's just not enough driver autonomy or anything like that. So the movable bodywork, the active aerodynamics, it goes through the control, the control ECU, the standard ECU, but it is driver activated. You get to a point on the circuit where you are allowed to either fully or partially, depending on the situation, activate the active aerodynamics, and you press a button in much the same way as you would with the DRS. And there will be there's a fail-safe system within it as well, so it should, I believe, deactivate in much the same way that the DRS activates or has activated in the past with lifting and braking. And in the event that the system fails, it's required by design to disengage the active aerodynamics. So if you are going down the straight in straight line mode and you've got your minimum downforce, minimum drag, if something breaks, you don't get to the next corner and both your front and rear wings are in not cornering mode and you're struggling. So that's kind of it kind of works in practice to what we've become used to with the standard DRS on the rear wing.
Only you all get to use it in the same way. That's the key thing,
yes.
Isn't it? It's actually going to be, there'll be some design differences, but in terms of the utilisation, everyone can use it where basically they're not traction limited within the allotted zones, which is basically everywhere it can be.
Yes, and while it's not mandatory to use it, and you could in theory have loads of different ways in which the teams try and utilise it, like you just can't, because the fastest, most efficient and safest way to go down a straight in a 2026 F1 car is going to be to have the active aerodynamics engaged and be in your straight line mode and having as little downforce and drag as possible, not to have the car bouncing along the ground, not to be using energy that you don't need to be using. So while I still think in theory there's a bit of potential to maybe change the way that you recharge the battery if you wanted to come out of straight line motors a little bit earlier or anything like that, because of the reasons of like efficiency and whatnot. I just struggle to think there'll be too much variation there. Where the variation might come in will be the extent to which the cars shed the downforce and the drag. Like, how efficient are your systems, how aggressively do you play it, but there are limitations to how much you can get the active aero to what's the right way of phrasing it, kind of like engage, basically. Like, it's not like your wings will not simply disappear, and there is only so far that they can open, back off, however you want to phrase it.
But I think the teams will kind of custom them to each different track, depending on downforce levels, drag levels, the nature of the straights themselves. Because if there's a high-speed kink where you need some downforce, you don't want to have full-on your active down and not producing anything. So there'll be that. So, and there may be variation in terms of how much it angles up when they choose to open it, because you don't have to open it to the maximum amount. So I think it'll become a big technical war between teams, and an area of real interest, something for us to dig into. But if you're watching it from the outside on TV, you'll just see the wings flipping up and down.
Yeah, I think that's right. We're going to end up talking about it in terms of specific car technical design compromises, that kind of thing. Why is a car quicker at this track than that track? And that'll be one of the things, a little bit like with DRS. We had people who had more efficient DRSs and less efficient DRSs, and it was down to how loaded your rear wing was, where it was loaded, etc. All of those little details, rather than it being kind of a magic thing you can do something clever with to facilitate an overtake. Right, the next question I'll take is from Clint Kidder, who says, is the 50-50 electric split a virtual signal woke idea to appease climate change, folks? This is a really good example of a question that I don't really like the phrasing of, because the phrasing's very pejorative, but actually underneath it, there's quite a lot to this question. So I sort of want to try and unwrap it a bit, because these regs have been dictated by the desire for manufacturers to be seen to be driving some of this technology and to be able to justify the budgets they're signing off as helping to develop this technology. So actually, this sort of is the driving force of this whole regs package, isn't it?
The 50-50 has been one of the big selling points, and the other big selling point was that what was 100% sustainable fuel has now been changed to fully sustainable fuel, because it's not actually 100%. So there are some kind of tiny details. So the 50-50 split isn't 50-50, it's kind of 55, 45, 56, 44, depending where you're at, and the fuel's in the high 90s. But as a headline thing, these things always kind of are quite important for manufacturers to get the sign off.
And also showing the significance of appeasing a certain like narrative or demand at the time is the fact that there's been so much discussion over the last 12 to 15 months of whether or not F1 and the FAA immediately want to move away from this rule set before it even came into existence. So how important actually is the electrification that they've gone for? They're obviously now trying to emphasise massively how much of a technical step it is, how important it is to be able to do this and do this in a more sustainable way, the most sustainable way that F1's ever done it, and all of that. And a lot of it is valid messaging, but it is, I don't know if hypocritical is the right word, but it does jar slightly when you know that there's already moves afoot and have been moves afoot for a long time to scrap the electrification, scrap the near 50-50 element, and go to something that is a V8 engine with the advanced sustainable fuels as the core, because that's going to be the, to sort of semi-quote the original question, that's going to be the next woke agenda that takes over Formula One. So I think it's more just, as you say, when there's sort of something valid within the question, but maybe the phrasing's not quite there, it's like there's elements of this that have just existed for a very long time. It's kind of just, this is just now the label that gets put on it, because appeasing manufacturers has been on-off a key part of Formula One for a really, really long time, and you could argue the entire hybrid era is just them folding to the will of the manufacturers to make sure that there are enough big-name manufacturers involved in producing engines. You would argue from an F1 and FIA perspective, I suspect, that simply getting Audi in is justification for it, because Audi and that group is the entity that has shouted the loudest for this sort of thing, but it has also kept in the majority of the other engines. The only reason another manufacturer in Renault isn't involved is because it's just not good enough and doesn't want to commit the financial firepower to it. So to a greater or lesser extent, it's worked in terms of interesting those manufacturers, and also we know that manufacturers are what people care about. So there's a limit to what we can say that it's irrelevant, because actually manufacturers drive a lot of interest in Formula One.
And if we end up in energy harvesting disasters and the races are terrible and it's all needs to be revamped, the best tool in the FI's pocket is to pull back that 300 kilowatt power, so you stop it being 50-50. That proposal they put forward start of last year was go back to 200, I think, so you're automatically going to adjust that ratio. But I think you'll get a headline 50-50 for qualifying or whatever happens, and that's still quite an impressive number.
Yeah, very much so. And this whole thing, you're always trying to appease those who are spending the money. And virtual signalling, I guess you could say that's advertising, really, isn't it, in marketing? That's always been part. Anytime there's sponsorship, that's part of it, isn't it? So that's all in there. Now, appeasing climate change, folks, I'm not sure climate change should really be a two sides kind of issue, should it? But it's become that, and obviously it's very easy for people to argue things aren't happening or are happening, but actually, you can look at what the evidence is and it's fairly clear. But I think what it is an interesting example of is how the solution that's been put forward is a bit one-dimensional, and this is always the problem in terms of anything, because everybody wants simple answers, and electrification was the easy answer, and actually it can be part of the answer, but it's not the whole answer. But everybody wants one answer, and F1's followed that way, and now people are starting to think, well, actually we need to consider other answers to get the right solution. And so F1's kind of a bit caught between a rock and a hard place on that.
But coming at it from F1's side, so sort of playing F1's advocate in a way, they would argue, I imagine, that they haven't gone in one specific area because it's the electrification augmented by the fuel, which I think this must be the first time that they've at least tried to have like two elements to it. And that's why I think it is just quite funny in a way that the next evolution of the engine cycles could be to just go back on the engines entirely and only have the fuel. But that's obviously a future matter. It definitely does tie into the whole, like, obviously the wider world element. All the one manufacturers are going to be part of the fabric of Formula One, which I don't really see much compelling evidence to suggest that people don't want that to be the case. Well, then it has to reflect the wider world. And if you take it to a massive extreme, but I still think like a logical extreme to a degree, there's not going to be any F1 at all if there are no cars and no engines in decades to come. So there needs to be an effort to work out, okay, what is a sustainable, and not in the kind of modern current use of sustainable in terms of the tech, but sustainable in terms of making sure things are still around. There has to be a way of making sure that can be reconciled with reality.
Yeah, that's going to be an enduring challenge that constantly shifts as well. Right, John, a question from LAZY, who said, there was a lot of goodbye DRS baiting at the end of last year, but are we actually saying goodbye to anything? Obviously, DRS is still present, just being used differently with the overtake button. So is anything really changing in regards to what was disliked with the DRS solution for the overtaking problem?
Well, it's changing because it's moving from an aero ability to overtake to a power ability to overtake. The cars will look the same in terms of that DRS mechanism at the rear, but it's now active aero, it's not used for overtaking. But I think the end product, which is what matters to fans watching at TV and what we see, is what does it impact it have on the racing. And I think it is going to be almost like for like, and the key thing will be for F1 and the FIA to make sure that the power boost and the ability and how long the zones are don't make overtaking automatic and easy and straightforward, and they don't make it too difficult. So I think when you look at all the complaints emerged about DRS, it's been whenever it's been too easy, so a driver gets within a sniff of 1 second of the car in front, and then they're passed with absolutely no effort and it's dead easy, or it's been the zone's been too short and it's been impossible and we've got no overtaking. DRS was always about making an overtaking move possible. It wasn't about guaranteeing it. It wasn't about making it easy. And this is what this overtake mode should be like. But I think it's going to be more complicated by the fact that there is going to be variation of energy levels. So even without overtake mode, you may well get cars passing each other anyway. And I think in the end, it's all going to get wrapped up in the same thing. The early predictions are there's going to be a lot of easy passes of cars blasting past another one on the straight just because the car has run out of energy. And that may not be a good thing for the spectacle.
Even if they end up in the sort of, all cars end up in the sort of 300 to 350 kilometres an hour range on the straights, that's a big variation. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out.
It's more tunable. That could be the interesting thing as well, because it's not zones in the same way, but it's dictated by the speeds the cars are going at, and it's not just a straight power boost. These things are a little bit more complex, but that also means it's tunable and adjustable, and there could be phases where you think, oh, actually in the future if we do it this way or that way, it'll get kind of contested braking zones a little bit more, because that's what people are really looking for in terms of not having easy overtakes. So that's an opportunity it presents as well.
One of the downsides to the way that F1's had to go with this rule set in terms of using the active aero as a means of assisting with energy management and efficiency rather than from an overtaking perspective is we don't have the evidence of whether or not F1 would have had enough belief in the rule set, the FIA would have had enough belief in the rule set to scrap the DRS if there was no active aero. So if you didn't need if the active aero didn't have to be on the car for efficiency reasons, and you didn't have adjustable bodywork of any kind, would they have gone, the rest of this rules, we've learned our lessons in terms of better following, a better overtaking, we don't need the DRS, the overtaking aid anymore. But I would suggest that the advent of the overtake mode, which again is a consequence of the complex nature of the way that the energy availability is going to work, the power deployment is going to work, the added electrification of the power units, I think the fact that exists shows that they don't have the confidence that it will be a, let's say, quote unquote normal way of racing, and that has to exist because of the increased electric formula that we've got. But what do you think? How much faith does F1 have in the rules working, the overtaking being good, if you have to have what people might call gimmicks?
Well, they're not seeming super confident, but fundamentally you've got to create something, because there are still problems in following, etc. There are all sorts of laws of physics reasons why overtaking's difficult, but what I will say is the rules have been, as we talked about, created because of that notional 50-50 split, and kind of everything's followed, which is not the most holistic way of putting together.
I think also need to see how it works in reality, because you can have all your simulations in your head about how it all plays out, but what you do in terms of your energy deployment, where you're saving energy, where you're using it, doesn't matter if everyone else is doing a different thing or if they're doing the same thing, or you need to respond. So it's going to evolve and change, and I think we need to see how it plays out. Are there variations? Are there clever ways of doing it? Are some drivers going to elect just to save energy, get swamped on a certain section of the track because they know they can retake everybody later on that track? And will this kind of swapping of positions backwards and forwards, will that be a bad thing for the spectacle? Will it be a good thing for the spectacle? I think until we actually see it play out and know what's at play, because we could end up in a scenario where all the teams do exactly the same thing and overtake becomes completely irrelevant and doesn't work because drivers are saving energy to counter those that are hitting overtake, or they know where they're going to get overtaken on this bit of tracks. They'll save more energy to utilise what they've got later on. So I think it's hard to predict it's going to be good or bad, terrible, what needs tweaking, until we actually see it in the heart of competition, and probably over 5 or 6 races as well, because what works well on one layout may be a disaster on another.
Yeah, you need to watch for knee-jerk reactions. You need to get a decent sample set of races. Right, Scott, a question from Elliot Smith. I was surprised to learn that the new power units are homologated from the start of this year. I know there are opportunities every 6 races to help, particularly far off the pace teams try and catch up. But does this have the potential to lock in a power unit advantage for one manufacturer?
It could do, because if you looked at it on paper, it's theoretically an engine freeze from the start of the 26 season all the way through to 2030. But it won't be that in reality, because if anyone is far off, they will have opportunities to develop. If anybody has incidental changes that they want to make for reasons of cost or reliability, the usual caveats that are in there, small little kind of installation changes that are possible, development along the way in terms of like how much better you can make your fuels around that sort of thing, and also just working out how to optimize things and run them better. Like the engines that run in 27 won't be the same as 26, let alone by 2030. But I think the biggest aspect to it is going to be like what's actually possible with in-season upgrades or upgrades to the following season, because that's where these additional development opportunities exist. I forget the exact acronym that F1's come up with for it.
ADUA, ADUO, isn't it?
Yeah, additional development and upgrade opportunities, I guess it would be my guess for that acronym.
Don't try and define the acronym. Just stick with it.
Yeah,
and then
so-
people can be baffled and confused,
and we can
F1
explain.
will be happy because that's what it likes, an acronym that nobody understands.
And then we can explain it. So basically, the way it will work is they'll have this performance index that's created, and if you're between 2 and 4% away, you're going to get one additional upgrade this season and one upgrade for the following season. If you're more than 4% away, you get 2 now, 2 later. Exactly how that plays out in terms of timing of it and whatnot will be interesting. But if that is a powerful opportunity, if you can use that with your, I think it's a combination of, a spec change to the homologation, but it's also you adjust your dyno usage and spend as well to obviously be able to facilitate that. I don't think you take away from that in the same way. What's the point? You're just gonna from an engine manufacturer perspective, you're kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul, so it wouldn't quite work. But if it's powerful, if a single upgrade is big, or if 2 upgrades in one season and then 2 for the next, the following year's homologation, March the 1st, ends up being something significant, then the worst case scenario for a manufacturer that's currently got an advantage, or the best case scenario for the manufacturer behind, is that changes the order completely. So it genuinely depends what the extent of any deficits are, and then realistically, within the restrictions that do still exist, how much you can use one of those upgrades to catch up. And that's impossible to say sitting here now. So I'm curious to see how it works, and also how much any kind of like marginal difference versus that performance index plays out. Like, it's all well and good putting an exact percentage on it, 2 to 4% or 4% or more, but 1.9, do you round up? Like, how do you define that? And they've already changed it, because in an older version of the rules for this year, rather than it be these kind of, so there is multiple opportunities through the year based on how many races there are, like 1 to 6, 7 to 12, 13 to 18, and then the end. There's different ways it's going to work. For example, like if you don't qualify for one of those upgrade opportunities in the first 2 points, if you only qualify technically in the final part, you don't get one. So you have to have been eligible basically earlier in the season than just at the very end. But in an early version of the regulations, it was only if you were more than 3% away. So they've changed that, because they've obviously gone that's a bit too far, which tells you the kind of significance of the, how much a percent actually makes a difference. So it's really curious to see how it plays out in reality.
And there's going to be plenty of doubtless lobbying and talk from any manufacturer who's struggling, and then counter talk from those who aren't.
What's your engine manufacturer pecking order prediction as you sit here right now?
Well, there's so little to go on, but
I know, that's why I've asked you.
everybody's got Mercedes on top, haven't they? So Mercedes.
It should be Mercedes, Ferrari, Honda, and then Audi and Red Bull at the back, purely based on experience and existing programs and whatnot.
Yeah, but Red Bull could be a little bit better off, but I think we've got a question about them later. So it's really, really hard to go on, and that's such a gentle prediction that we'll be revising them very, very.
You've heard from both camps in terms of the engine loophole that emerged over Christmas. So what's the doomsday prediction from both sides?
Well, I think we're talking about engine ratios and stuff later on, but I think, as Ed says, everyone's predicting Mercedes to be in front. We don't know by how much. But then after that, you hear various stories that there is a degree of optimism from Renault, not from Renault, sorry.
It's definitely not.
Not from them, from Red Bull.
Shotgun back.
About,
we're back! It was all a ruse! And then the Alpine Renault will dominate the World Championship because they've been secretly beavering away in Viry. What a plan that would be.
Yeah, because Red Bull initially, when you looked at it kind of 12 months ago or more, the talk was it was going to be terrible and at the back. But actually, the messaging is a bit more positive. I don't know if they're expecting to match Mercedes, but they should be up there. Then Ferrari, you hear stories about it's not actually super strong. They've had some challenges which they need to push on. Honda's the same thing. We've heard that their battery element isn't as good as others, so they may be a bit behind. Audi have been playing things down. So it's a really mixed bag. And it may be, in the end, we may never know, that it could come down to fuel. And if fuel's worth 1, 2, 3 temps a second per lap, then what impact does that have on where each manufacturer stacks up? Where does this compression ratio thing, where does that fit into the bigger picture? What if the batteries of one power unit are worse than another, but the ICE's better. I think it's going to be really, actually, quite difficult and complicated, and may require even teams themselves to be scratching their heads just trying to work out what are the core elements of this package that makes it good. Because if your ICE's 4 tenths better than somebody else's, but your battery's half a second off each lap, and then your car's 2 tenths better than somebody else's, how do you correlate why you're 3 tenths behind someone else?
It reminds me of when I first started covering F1 full time, and I was dealing with Honda quite a lot through 2018. One of the things I picked up very early on in their that was when they were with the second Red Bull team, Toro Rosso, back then, so 2 iterations ago, and then gearing up for Red Bull. And the thing that really stood out through 2018 and 2019, when they'd obviously come out of that McLaren partnership, and they were really, really, they seemed unshackled. Like they seemed so much happier with the freedom and trust that they felt that they had from the Red Bull side, and their messaging was really strong on that. They didn't view it, whereas McLaren, this is very different. They didn't view it as car and engine. They viewed it as a car and engine package, because they were so intertwined, and that will only be more of the case now because of how kind of contorted the car regs are around the engine one. So it's going to be so hard to separate them, as much as certain parties might end up trying.
And question from Adam B that I'll take. In the Look Ahead to 2026 podcast, there's a lot of talk about energy management. I want to understand, will the battery be capable of being fully recharged on a lap, or will the battery deplete over the race like FE? Yeah, it's very much not kind of an FE, your battery's 100% and then it's 50% in the second half of the race or whatever. It's going to be constantly charging and discharging, because you can't save what's in the battery on this lap for next lap. You've got to keep harvesting. So actually, if you were to track the state of charge, it's going to be constantly fluctuating. So that's the way to think of it. So it's constant charge and discharge, rather than trying to get a huge amount in to save it for later, because you need to use it at such a rate. Then it's just get as much as you can in and use it pretty much all over a given lap in the best possible way.
But the key thing is if it drops to 0% on a lap, or you can charge it up to 100%, because if you don't hit either of those extremes, then you get into a scenario where you could save power or do your deployments slightly differently.
Yeah, well, there'll be an ideal kind of steady state running deployment strategy you'll need to get to follow.
Because you could get into approaches where you can only charge your battery, say, at 80% for a lap, but you want to save for the final 5 laps of the race. You want to make sure you're at 100% and you can go maximum attack. So for a phase of the race, you're not deploying your full energy, you're saving it, you're recharging. Those are the things we don't understand yet. And I think it'd be more critical of tracks.
It's kind of about where you end up sort of centering your de facto 0 point, if you want, because of the level of the up and down. So you could have a kind of steady state running strategy that leaves you 20% in reserve, and then you're in steady state running until you get to a phase where you want to use that and you can dig into it. So it's just, I guess the key thing is the amount that you can keep in there. So it's think of it in terms of the run plan, the run strategy of that management.
Because some tracks, I think Melbourne and Jeddah, for example, has been quite hard to charge your battery up, because there's not many low speed, heavy braking zones. So they're going to be very different approaches to somewhere like Monaco. They're going to have tons of power, and it's going to be spectacular seeing these cars, full on all their boost, blast down from Casino Square out into the tunnel, start finish straight. They're going to be absolutely fantastic to look there, but they're not going to be like that everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And there'll be some tracks where they're just going to have to maximise the steady state running, otherwise you're just going to be too slow ultimately. So again, it'll be interesting to see what the efficiency of the harvesting, etc., because that's something that could make a big difference. Right, John, we'll come to you for the first question of the second part from Nevin Knowles. Can you explain the change from a fuel flow limit, and how can this affect the amount of horsepower the engine produces? And compared to the potential compression limit trick, how much more horsepower can a team have over another based on this?
So, it's 2 questions there. So first of all, the fuel flow, so the previous turbo hybrid regs, it was 100 kilograms an hour, so it was actually a mass measurement. For this regulation, it's changing to energy, so you get 3,000 megajoules an hour, which will be tailored for each car, checked by the fuel flow meter. So it's a different way of approaching. So basically, if you have got a very energy dense fuel, you can have less of it in your car will be lighter, and there's a performance benefit there. So it's a different way of measuring it. I think it'll be interesting, and we'll probably find out over a course of the season which fuel is better, because if someone's able to run a couple of kilos lighter every single race, that performance benefit will come up. And in terms of the compression ratio trick, nobody knows for definite. I've spoken to someone who understands engines and power units performance quite well. Their estimate, when they've done it on their dyno, based on a compression ratio of 18 compared to the 16 to 1 that they've read it, was that it was 10 kilowatts, which is about 13 horsepower, and their analysis is it was between 0.3 and 0.4 seconds per lap, depending on how power sensitive it is. So it's a decent chunk, and if it does make a difference, it could shake up the grid quite a bit.
Next question for you, Scott, from JL. How will the new car dynamics impact driving styles for each driver, and who do you think will make the most of managing battery deployment and outsmart the grid? And Ranch Dingus connected to that asks what techniques could make a comeback, i.e. will Hamilton's braking style work again? And James asks if the new regs will suit a particular style of driver.
Driving style is going to be very interesting, which is why I think getting trackside in testing and actually understanding how the cars behave in reality is going to be really, really curious, because while a lot of the characteristics of the ground effect era, for example, will be gone, they'll be more comfortable to drive for starters, but they won't have the same aero central pressure shift into the corner. They won't behave the same way in terms of the dynamics of the ride height won't be quite the same, because they won't be being pulled to the ground at the same part of the car to the same extent and then changing as the speed comes off as they roll into the corner. They'll be lighter, they'll be slightly smaller, so the whole point is that they're trying to make them nimbler and a bit more agile to drive, but they should also have quite a bit less grip through the corners, and because of the way that the engines are, they should be a lot faster off of the corners, assuming obviously you can get the power down and pull away from the corners. So all that is to say, the entire entry and through corner balance nature of the cars could shift from how it is before, and I don't think we really have a really good reference from the pre-ground effect era as well. I don't think, for example, the 2017 to 2021 cars are necessarily they're certainly not a like-for-like change. There'll be, there's a lot being made in terms of setup opportunities. There's going to be a bit more flexibility because you won't have to run the cars so stiff into the ground. There'll be a bit more rake on these cars, certainly more than we had before. So how's that going to impact things?
Okay. Update from the flight deck. Right. Descending over a mountain range in thick cloud is not ideal. That's the situation we find ourselves in. Now, hopefully, the cloud isn't too thick that I can see the tops of the mountains as we come over them. Now, I've set the plane to descend to 19,000 feet because I feel like coming all the way down to 7 might be a bit too low. So we'll cruise on down to 19, and unless it's Mount Everest below us, we should be fine. But I'll come down to 19. We're going to have to deviate off the flight path anyway, so I'm not that pressed about the altitude because we're having to do more mileage than the flight plan would suggest anyway. So I'm not too fussed about altitude in terms of, we're going to be too high up to get it down and then nose diving it in. No, because we're going to have to come round the houses anyway, because we are approaching, the flight plan is taking us directly to the runway, and we'd be approaching it side on anyway. So I'm going to have to deviate to come out sort of west anyway to then land eastbound, if you get what I mean. So I'm not too fussed about nose diving it in now to 3,000 feet for landing. I'm more, let's clear these mountains and then we can play the long game in terms of we can go 20 miles out to come 20 miles back in whilst we do the rest of the descent, basically. So it's just all about clearing this mountain range without getting dangerously close to the peaks, and then just chilling out from there and going round the houses to get the altitude, to get the rest of the altitude off, and then come in. So I'm not. This is not a speed run. Nose dive into Tehran at all, because that will end the world tour. If I just come down to 7 now, if I just program the plane to come down to 3,000 feet now, we might be in serious trouble. So that is not the game plan. The game plan is to just come down to 19. We shouldn't hit anything at 19,000 feet, I wouldn't have thought. And then just sort of clear these mountains. We look like we look like we're double the height of the, I might then come down to sort of 10 or 15,000 feet as we go over the mountains. And then we can deviate and make our own sort of final approach. We can deviate, go in the wrong direction for 5 or 10 minutes, and then pull a 180 and come back in once we're over this mountain range. But yeah, I'm not about to nose dive in over these mountains. Basically, we're going to play it cautiously, obviously, and just safely clear these mountains, and then play it from there. So yeah, 3/4 an hour flight might be out the window. It might be an hour all in, but it's better to be safe than sorry and take another 1/4 of an hour to do this, rather than risk it all for the scrape the top of the mountains and then nosedive it in with a 90-degree swerve and go kamikaze. No. This is not the time for kamikaze flights, 130 flights in. So, I'm not liking the fact that we're going through this thick cloud and I don't really know what's in the middle of it. But we seem high enough at the moment where it's not going to be a massive issue. But, I am going to have my wits about me, let's put it that way. We'll come down to 19, cruise for a few minutes, have a look. If it can bleed off another 5,000-10,000 feet, I will do. But if it's looking a bit ropey, we'll keep it at 19. And like I say, we have to do some extra mileage anyway once we're on the other side of these mountains. So it's not a big problem. We'll bleed off the altitude eventually. That's how we're playing it cautious into Iran. Okay.
It's a fairly long way of saying, like, at the moment I don't think it's clear what kind of driving style it will suit. I think that is only going to emerge over time. What we can say a bit more certainly, I know there's a few drivers, Fernando Alonso, Carlos Sainz, Alex Albon's talked about it as well, are very interested to see what kind of impact you can make as a driver by understanding all the tools that you've got available. All of these drivers are very, very fast, and they can all adjust their driving styles to a greater or lesser extent to be pretty quick depending on what it is. Some might have more comfort naturally than others, but what can they do with their driving, with the way they're braking, with the way they're carrying the speed through and off a corner, how they're prioritising areas to charge and discharge around the lap? What can they do to manipulate these rules to better effect? That's an area of opportunity around the sort of conventional driving style question.
Because there's an interesting philosophical question here, that if in traditional sense you'd expect a good F1 driver to be faster around a corner than a worse F1 driver. So if one gained 1/10 of a second through a sequence of corners, you go, oh, they're better. But with this regulation set, there's a scenario where actually if you're bashing it into first gear, happy that it's running at full-on revs, charging the battery up massively against a driver who doesn't want to be driving this weird way, then the other driver's happier and 1/10 quicker through this section. But the guy who's been on first gear, ragging it, not looking very quick, has gained half a second more energy per lap, so it's actually faster on the whole lap. There's going to be a really interesting analysis to be done about what tools and where is it quicker and what is going to make the perfect F1 driver for this set of regulations.
And the perfect driver will be the one that's adaptable and that can see that global big picture and take it on board and deploy it, because one of the key things for a great driver is being adaptable. The interesting thing is there is the potential for not being quite so boxed into a set driving style in terms of the dynamics of the car. But although you remove that box, you might get boxed in on the energy harvesting side of things. So, yeah, it will be an interesting storyline. Dave Smith has a question I'll take now. We've heard a lot about the engine and aero components for 2026, but not so much about the new tyres. Teams have become experts at lengthening stints in recent times to bring about constant one-stop races. Will the new rubber be like to change this, or will tyre life be the same or longer than before? Well, the aim is for the tyres not to be enormously different. They're trying to have a slightly bigger peak performance delta, more like 7 or 8 tenths, because once you get into a race stint, that comes down a bit. So rather than being, say, half a second peak difference, then it comes down to 3 tenths, more like 7 or 8 tenths down to 5, 6 tenths. That's what they're hoping for. But overall, they're hoping for a similar kind of thing in terms of the stint length. I mean, obviously, they still like a choice of sort of 1 or 2 stop ideally, or 2 or 3 stop even would be great. But I think the best way to think of the tyres is they're going to be, if it works as expected, pretty similar in terms of the way they work racing wise as they did last year. Whether that be the case, we don't know, for the simple reason obviously the tyres have been developed using the simulation indoor technology, running on mule cars, etc., nothing like the real cars. So yeah, let's see if it actually turns out that way. But don't expect the tyres in themselves, unless something unexpected has happened, to have a huge change and a huge shift.
One aspect of it that will be very interesting to watch is with the way that these engines will work and what is going to be possible for them if they go maximum attack and unleash Armageddon every time that they go on full throttle exit in the corner, is the tyres being slightly smaller across the board, especially at the rear, the footprint's slightly smaller.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's a case where, like, when everything's working as it should, there's going to be a lot more energy going through these tyres and less of a tyre to handle it. So how much, especially under traction, are these tyres going to be screaming when it comes to, you know, the thermal challenge and then managing it, and then how does that manifest over the course of a stint? So Pirelli, certainly at the end of the last year, speaking to Mario Isola at the tyre test in Abu Dhabi, for example, seemed quite as confident as they can be that they're not expecting any drastic, as you say, traits in terms of how they handle, but they just don't know. That is I'm not saying that they've just, they're not sticking their finger in the air and trying to have a complete guess, but it's a guess of some description. It's an estimate, isn't it?
Well, yeah, because they haven't been able to run the tyres on the car. So that's the curse of being the tyre supplier in F1 these days, that you've got to test with a very vague approximation and then all the off-track simulation stuff. So it's going to be a storyline to watch, but...
Okay, I've come up with a plan. I'm going to deviate now, and we're going to go over this way, and then we're going to get the altitude down as we come in like this. So I'm going to go over this lake here. I'm going to head over there, maybe head for somewhere around this region, to be honest. Head about there, and then we can get the altitude off as we come in here. Okay, that's the plan. Let's execute.
The intent certainly hasn't been to revolutionise what the tyres are doing. It's try and get a similar behaviour of product, but on a very different car and with different tyre sizes. So yeah, this could be an interesting storyline. Right, Scott, question from Luke Sherman. I'd love to get a bit more of an idea about what's going on with the fuels. I know that we have heard a bit about the ideas and the cost, but it still feels like a black box. And Alex Hindley asked if there's any update on the fuel price issue.
So when it comes to the development of the fuels themselves and where it leaves the team, what the expectations are in terms of the impact on performance and reliability, the fascinating thing is how much of an unknown it still is. And actually, Williams boss James Vowles picked out the fuels as one of the main things he's concerned about going into pre-season testing. Not because he thinks, oh, this is going to be a disaster, nothing's working, but because in his words, we don't know. They don't know how the engines will run in reality, but they just do not know what the impact will be of running it all in the real world out of simulation for the first time. This is a massive oversimplification of it, and I would actually urge people to go, maybe, I think Mercedes in particular put out some Road to 2026 stuff that's really good on their YouTube channel, and there is a Advanced Sustainable Fuel one of that, so if you do want to learn more, I would recommend that as a really good independent resource from this. But the basic simplification, the basic version of it is that F1 fuels just inherently are so tailored to match the engines, and the challenge of the engines has changed for this year, and the challenge of matching the fuel to them has changed, partly because the engine is working in a very different way. There's no MGUH anymore, which was attached to the turbo before, so the engine itself is working differently, but it's also attached to now the much uprated hybrid side of things, the electric side of things rather, so the power output on the electrical side is different, power deployment of these engines is going to be different, the way they run is going to be different. At the same time, the whole chain basically of developing the fuel now has to meet a certain sustainability standard. So the way that you develop a fuel has changed. There's still limitations in terms of chemistry and technology in developing the fuel. So, and I say that I know it's an oversimplification of it, it's probably the hardest chemical battleground from a fuel perspective that F1's ever had, and no one knows what's going to be the best way of doing it. And kind of goes back to what we were saying before, there's like so many different ingredients with the way that the cars and the engines will run. Like a package overall could be put completely out of kilter by just one aspect of it being wrong.
And of course it is a black box because it's chemistry basically, isn't it? So although we'll get some understanding of the characteristics and people will talk about what certain fuels are good at, we can't look at it. It's not like a new wing profile design where you can at least see the difference even if you can't understand all the details of it. So it's a difficult thing on the outside to understand. How about the price issue, John? Obviously it's not in the cost cap, it's exempt from the cost cap this year, the fuel costs, but there's still a problem of teams have to spend money on it, and some teams are better equipped to do that than others.
Yeah, I think as teams dug into the new rules and the fuel suppliers, I think the problems of sourcing the components, the supply chains, the fact you're producing limited quantities compared to real world fuels meant the prices were extremely high. I think some in the end were talking about €500 a litre, which is pretty hefty. You don't want to be going to taking your car down to the fuel pump and it's €500 a litre. So it is an issue. It's not been solved properly. I think there are discussions ongoing just to try and bring it down. I think the solution is primarily about just getting rid of those 1%, 2% of ingredients and additives and things that are very expensive and very difficult to source for expensive supply chains. But it's not something that can be sorted overnight. So it's an ongoing issue, and I think there's going to be a lot of unhappy people signing off expensive fuel bills this year, hoping it is improved quite quickly.
Right, the final question for this section comes from Pamela Rudolph that I'll take. This may seem like a dumb question, but with all new cars and new tools for the drivers, boost, overtake, etc., in 2026, how will you determine if it's the driver that's driving well versus the car that's a poor performer? How many testing sessions or Grand Prix will you need to observe to start making some statements about both car and driver performance? Well, it's a very sensible question, that one, I would say. There's very few dumb questions, and that one certainly isn't one. It will be difficult because obviously you have to understand why drivers are doing what they're doing, what the limitations of the car are. Obviously you've got two drivers in each team, which is a useful benchmark. So regardless of how they're doing it, if driver X is consistently quicker than driver Y, their teammate, then we know they're doing a better job. But we will start quite quickly to build up a picture of the broad brushstrokes of the driving techniques, etc. But it's that thing, as you mentioned earlier, John, there might be things that if you look at a specific corner, they're not optimising point A to point B, but point A to point C, and the whole global energy management thing is better. So it's going to be quite three-dimensional. It's going to take a little bit of time to fully understand who's doing what and why, but it's important to note it's still a driving challenge as well, because even if you're managing energy, you still need to get through the corner as quickly as possible within that limitation. So there'll still be plenty of chances for the drivers to express themselves, but getting the full picture is going to take just a little bit of time, isn't it? And it'll build up through testing, won't we? We'll start off with the first time we see the cars in testing. we'll know a little bit. By the end of testing, we'll know a little bit more, and then after a few Grand Prix weekends, we've seen how it works, and we'll start to see the trends, etc. So you'll just get a better picture as you go on. But still, the stopwatch never lies, does it?
The 2026 edition of the Racing Drivers Book of Excuses is going to have a couple more chapters in it this year, isn't it? It's going to be picking out the points where they have a legitimate grievance with something versus what was in their control is going to be more challenging, and there are different things that can go wrong. And we'll also need, not just so we've got more time to kind of observe what the drivers are doing and observe patterns, you're going to need to see different circuit types because of how much that influence could vary circuit to circuit based on what the energy demands are.
Because it could be a driver's 1 tenth slower through a corner, gets more energy. We see that this energy gives them an advantage to overtake. But from the outside, that's just the car and engine looking better rather than it being the driver giving them the benefit. And those are the aspects that will be really hard for us on the outside to get unless you're getting, the teams will be saying, actually, this overtake move that won the race was because X driver managed to harvest more energy through sector 2.
Now, there are a few drivers who will do a very good job of making it very clear the impact they had.
But a lot of them will do it badly. And it's really important for drivers to actually think about this and realise there's benefit to them in terms of communicating what they're doing, why they're doing it, etc. And not in a just sort of throwing out excuses in an irritated way. So there's a chance there for them to explain it. Us on the outside, we need to ask the right questions and try and understand where are trade-offs, where are limitations, etc. But the more races you get, the bigger sample set you'll get, and the more pieces of the puzzle you'll be able to put together. So it'll be really, really interesting to see. But you will see the drivers who are adapting well will start to show quite early on, just as we found in 22 with the new ground effect cars. Right, we'll finish off with a few more competitor-specific questions, let's put it that way. John, the first for you from Paul R. Will Aston Martin shape up as a champion team, or is it just a team of champions with Newey, Alonso, Cardile, Honda et al.?
I think the potential's there to get there. I think the key thing to understand is how long it's going to take, because I don't think it's going to make that leap and become a champion team this year. And then the question on that, is that time frame fit in with the patience of Lawrence Stroll, for example, that if this is a 5-year project to get to the front and there's a lot of troubles on the way, is the patience there from everyone involved to remain there? So those two timelines need to match up for that team to get there.
The trick that they'll be deploying there is they're already adjusting the timeline slightly. I've seen something from towards the end of last year where Lawrence Stroll said, when I took over this team or set this in motion, I always said it would be like a 10-year thing or something like that, and it just wasn't. So just like every single interview he did in the first sort of 2 years of that project existing made it very clear it was like 4 or 5 years. It definitely wasn't 10. So,
and it's fine to change your timeline with circumstances. There's nothing wrong with that.
But just don't pretend.
Don't be misleading about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it does feel like a team that maybe needs a little bit longer for things to work, but still doing a lot of the right things. So if Aston Martin's not winning at the start of this season, and it probably won't be, don't write it off as a team that's not coalescing. I think we're going to need a few more. Yes, right. Scott, a question from Thomas Knight. Is McLaren in the position to finally hit the ground running in a new rules set? 2006 with the first season of V8, 2009, 2014 and 2022 for ground effect were all poor in their own ways.
Yes, I think this is the first time you would say that across those years, certainly that the trajectory of the team in the position they were in at the previous year puts them in a good position to maximise the new rules. Working through them all very quickly. 2014 was obviously preceded by a very disappointing backward step, and actually the beginning of the decline of McLaren as a technical force and understanding in the way it was working together. They were still very much in that funk as the regulations changed through the latter part of the decade, and more of their own incompetencies or problems were becoming exposed through that following regulation change. They were disappointing at the start of the ground effect era. It had expected more from them based on how they developed quite nicely under the previous rule change once things started to work a bit better. But that was obviously because that was the final part of the pre-Andrea Stella team leadership and technical department and the way it's all working. So this is the first set of rule changes under the leadership that turned leadership from a team management and also technical perspective that turned McLaren into F1's championship winning force. So yes, by every possible measure, metric, whatever, this is the best version of McLaren attacking a new set of rules. So there isn't any excuse beyond F1 being very hard for them to not be at the front if the engine is capable of it. Like if there's a, if someone else is in the Mercedes 2014 position, then no, McLaren won't be winning races at the start of the year, or will struggle to win races, but they should not take a backward step versus their relative opposition.
Question from Aidan now. We talk about the Audi and Red Bull powertrains Ford engine companies as new, but companies do not hold all the knowledge and experience. What has happened with the people?
Cabin crew seats for landing. Right, let's do this. I reckon the descent's been pretty good. Cautious over the mountains, flying blind for a few minutes through those clouds. I was a little bit worried for a couple of minutes, but then it started flattening out. I thought, no, we're fine here. We were still at 20,000 feet, and we were over the mountains, so it was all good. I went out far enough to spin it round and give us a good enough run up for this. So, do you know what? I've played it well, I think. If we get this down nicely, obviously, I think I've played it quite well. Obviously cautiously, but with that kind of visibility and going over mountains, I'd be stupid if I didn't play it cautiously. Especially considering we're 130 flights in to a flawless World Tour run. So I would be a fool to not play it cautiously, but we are coming in now, full flaps, landing speed, so long enough runway where I don't have to touch down in the first 10 feet of it. And let's just cut the power now, and don't even have to use a rudder. Can just get this down nicely. Bit of a bounce, but nothing too extreme, nothing I've not dealt with before. Oh, we can just park here on the right, can't we? We don't have to do any mad expeditions. We can just peel off here and park up in the nearest bay. Let's have a look. What have we got available parking wise, boys? Well, there we are. We are down on the ground safely in the end. And like I say, I'm quite happy with how I played that. You could say it's overcautious over the mountains. I could have been at, I was at 20,000 feet. I could have been at 15, but yeah, like I say, I'm not going to risk anything, particularly as the World Tour goes deeper and deeper. I will become more and more risk averse, and with the cloud cover as well, it would have been stupid to go any lower. So I'm quite happy. Like I say, I'm quite happy with how I played it. Should we just park it up here? Yeah, this'll do us here, won't it? Yeah, I'm quite happy with how I played that. Yeah, caution was, whatever the saying is, the better course of valor. Valence is not a word, mate. Yeah, caution was the better part of valor there. And there you go. That is the mountain range that we... Now, obviously the flight plan wanted us to come directly over that mountain, nosedive in, and perform some sort of slalom to come in. But I'm glad I went a quarter of an hour in that direction, or, well, no, was it be... Yeah, no, it was, wasn't it? I'm glad I went a quarter of an hour in that direction to then pull the 180 and come back and obviously bleed the altitude off and everything on the way. Yeah, because that weather plus the mountains was not something I wanted to tackle whilst coming in with a steep descent. So yeah, we just cruised at 20,000 feet coming over and did the big deviation. And in the end, I think I've done the right thing. Snow? No, there isn't. Maybe, well, there is snow over there. But in the city centre, no such thing as of yet. Maybe later on this afternoon, but anyway. Only snow in the mountains. And thankfully we did have visibility because as I was pulling the turn to sort of come in for final, it was pretty much blind, and I was thinking, oh, is this whole thing going to be a blind descent using the map? Which I've done on a couple of occasions. There's been a couple of risky touchdowns where it's been completely blind and I've just been relying on the VFR map, and I've been stressing, like, as we're on approach and I can't see anything, going, where is it? But it wasn't like that. It sort of cleared up enough for me to see this double runway set up quite far out. Actually, I saw this double runway situation quite far out. I was able to line it up nicely, and then obviously get the flaps out, get down to landing speed, and all pretty well managed considering the challenge that was this mountain range plus that kind of cloud, that thick cloud cover. Despite the challenge, I reckon I managed that pretty well, and we are down the ground safely. This has been flight 130. It was Baku, Azerbaijan to Tehran, Iran, Mehrabad International Airport. And let's now, you can take your seatbelts off and breathe out. We have made it. How long did it take us then? I said 3/4 an hour. I've had 10 minutes on. 55. Yeah, there you go. So it's 9 minutes, 8 minutes more. But that is not a problem. Listen, this is not a speed run. This is a flawless run. And if it takes another 8 minutes to do a flight for safety reasons, for survival reasons, for continuation reasons, then I will do. So it's worth the 8 minutes every day of the week. So there you go then. It has been Baku to Tehran in 52 minutes and 59 seconds. We are down the ground safely, and the world tour continues. Join me next time as we fly to Ashgabat, Turkmenistan, as we hit the stands now for the next half dozen flights. So join me for that. Flight 131 will be to Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. And I think that is a slightly longer flight. I know I've been saying that for a couple of flights, saying, oh, it's going to be over the hour, And it's like half an hour, 3/4 an hour. But yeah, I think it is a slightly longer flight heading east. I think we now sort of head east into Asia. And get all the Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan. There's probably a couple more as well. But join me next time for Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. This has been Flight 130. I've been Captain Wilson, and the world tour continues. Thank you. Bye for now. See you next time.